Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and today we are off to Hong Kong. We are currently on the ferry from Macau over to Hong Kong, taking the Cotai water jet towards the city, and we're feeling super excited to spend the next week exploring Hong Kong. It seems like just a pretty magical place.
Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
This episode of the World Wanderers is brought to you by italki.com. italki is a language learning platform where you can find native speakers all over the world for affordable prices and have one-on-one coaching in the language of your choice. It's a funny coincidence because this week we are off to Hong Kong, and that is actually where italki is based. In Hong Kong, they speak Cantonese, so if you're interested in learning Cantonese or any other language, you can go to theworldwanderers.com/italki, get a 2-for-1 promo, connect with a native-speaking teacher, and take your language skills to the next level. We talk a lot on the show about the educational value of travel. For me personally, I feel like travel has taught me more valuable life skills in 6 months than 4 years of college did. Our sponsor for the show is Praxis. Praxis allows you to apprentice at a really cool startup and learn real valuable life skills and create a career that you're passionate about. We talked to Praxis participant Lisa Miller about how living abroad made her a good candidate for Praxis and made Praxis a really good fit for her.
Yeah. After living abroad for so long, you really learn to, because everything, the experience of living abroad, I think, is very intense. It's very, you have to always be on and thinking and problem solving. And so that also means that you have to learn to take responsibility for yourself and your actions and your happiness, because you can't be a passive participant in life. And I noticed this when I went abroad. I just couldn't sleepwalk through the grocery store. I'm like, holy shit, what does this mean? On the labels and everything. And how do I pay for this? And, oh, you put your basket over here. And just the entire experience of being abroad has taught me how to take responsibility for myself. And that made me, I think, ready to take on Praxis because I had this sort of independence and autonomy when I was applying.
If you're a college student who's felt the excitement of real-life learning abroad and you aren't getting that in your education experience at home, go to discoverpraxis.com, schedule a call, and find out if the program is right for you.
So as you heard, when we checked in last time at the beginning of this episode, we were on the ferry from Macau over to Hong Kong. And prior to heading to Hong Kong, we'd spent a week in Macau visiting some friends who we know from Canada who are teachers over there. And Hong Kong and Macau are located in the same bay. And it's only about an hour ferry ride to get from Macau to Hong Kong. It's super affordable, around $35 for a ferry ticket one way. And so we figured we're this close, we have to go to Hong Kong. And we gave ourselves an entire week to explore the city, because there seemed like there was a lot to do and to see and a lot of really great restaurants to eat at. And we wanted to be able to fully dive into everything that there was to see and do.
So there are a number of different options for ferries you can take from Macau to Hong Kong. Macau used to be 3 islands, now it's kind of 2. You can go from the main Macau side to the main island in Hong Kong. You can go to the mainland in Hong Kong, or you can go straight to the airport. And what we were doing was going from Taipa, which is the area that our friends lived in, and is also the area where all the big casinos are. So you go straight from there over to the island, and it's kind of funny because in the ferry port, there are all these booths for all the casinos and buses as they try to shuttle all these people from Hong Kong on the weekend over to Macau to get that gambling money.
Yeah, it's actually kind of cool too because they're currently in the process of building a bridge that'll go between Macau and Hong Kong. I knew that Macau and Hong Kong were close to one another before we went, but I didn't really realize that it was bridge close.
Well, it's not exactly conventional bridge close.
No, it'd be the longest bridge in the world, I think. But, that's just how they kind of roll over there, is largest things in the world, just defying what people think is possible in terms of infrastructure. But so we took...
Also defying what people think is logical in terms of infrastructure.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so kind of interesting. Our friends were telling us that, the bridge was supposed to be ready in 2017. And what they want to do is have the immigration port in the middle. So you would actually, exit Macau and then you would enter Hong Kong on the bridge.
Go to China first.
Oh yeah, because it's kind of like going around there. But anyway, so you go through immigration. So they set up this immigration port, and then they realized that it was moving. So now there's been a delay on the bridge, and I thought that was kind of interesting. But so we took the ferry for about an hour to get over to Hong Kong. And the thing that struck me the most when we sort of rounded the corner and came into the final stretch of the bay within Hong Kong was just how big everything was. The city is very, very impressive in terms of large buildings and impressive skyline.
Yeah, I remember talking about in our Singapore episode going out to Marina Bay.
Yeah, where the Marina Bay Sands Hotel is.
Yeah, I keep forgetting the name. Anyways, from there at night you watch the skyline of the city, and it's crazy skyline. But Hong Kong beats that too. Pulling up on the ferry and seeing the island of Hong Kong and all the buildings that are there is just like, whoa, this is a very, very developed city. And especially at night too, when you can see all of the light shows, which is something we did on our first night there actually. Seeing all the buildings lit up from across the island is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, so we arrived in Hong Kong kind of in the afternoon. We made our way by MRT, which is the transit system, off of the island to actually like the mainland part of Hong Kong where we were staying for our first night. And something that was kind of challenging about our week in Hong Kong was finding accommodation that was budget friendly. Hong Kong is very expensive. It's expensive to drink alcohol, expensive to eat in a lot of restaurants, and it's very expensive to stay, especially if you do want to stay on Hong Kong Island. And, you know, it wasn't in our budget to stay there, unfortunately. So we stayed on the mainland, which is fine because it's really easy to get across. And because we were going over on a Saturday, sort of last minute, we just booked an Airbnb that was it's like the TST area. I don't actually know how to pronounce it.
This is going to be horrific, but it's like Tim Sui or something like that.
Really
People
great
just
Cantonese.
call it TST though.
Yeah. And so when you're looking around for accommodation there, if you're going to Hong Kong, you'll probably read or hear things about the Chungking mansion. And we kind of stayed in that area, but not actually in the mansion because shit seems to go down there. And we were not really that interested in that.
Yeah, but there aren't that many affordable spots for backpackers. So it's kind of funny when you meet people and talk to them about going to Hong Kong. It seems like Chungking mansions is something that like half the backpackers who have been to Hong Kong have stayed at.
Yeah, and I mean, a couple of our other travel blogger friends stayed there, and they said, it was like an experience for one night. Not the greatest place to stay long term, but it was like an experience. Basically, it's a house or
it's apartment
building, and people rent out floors and kind of turn them into guest houses. But this one just has a lot of hawkers who are trying to sell you drugs, prostitutes, all kinds of not nice things. And it's just a little bit sketchy, I think, especially if you're like a solo female traveler or if you're, a couple of girls who are younger traveling. Maybe avoid the Chungking mansion, but, make your own decision based on what you think.
So the first day we got there, we had booked through Airbnb, but it was really a guest house kind of thing, like a apartment that they've converted into a guest house. Not the nicest place ever, but it was fine. And we're right on a main street in TST, and it's just a crazy, crazy area in terms of the amount of people. And it's something that we learned in Hong Kong. You think you're like in the busiest area, but you're not. So later on, we went go to some places where there's even more people. But it's pretty crazy arriving there, hey? And just like the feeling I kept describing it as is like when you go to a popular sporting event, like an NBA game, NFL game, and you're on the concourse and you're like trying to go get popcorn or a hot dog or something and then get back to your seat. Like that's what it's like walking around on the sidewalk in Hong Kong.
Yeah. It's interesting because it seems equally as busy as somewhere like New York City, but people in New York seem to like walk with so much purpose. Whereas in Hong Kong, it seems like everyone's kind of like, I don't know, dilly-dallying a little bit, which makes it, you kind of just become a part of that flow and walk slow, like exactly sort of like concert or massive sporting event style.
Yeah, and if you try to go fast, you just frustrate yourself.
Yeah, it's just not worth it.
So going into Hong Kong, we didn't have too much on our agenda, too much stuff we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to do a bit of hiking. Hong Kong is much more than just a developed island. There's a lot of cool spots you can go, a lot of kind of natural sites, which you wouldn't really have. I wasn't on my radar at all.
No, no, mine either. But I was really excited by the idea of hiking because we'd spent most of our time on our trip in big cities, and especially Hong Kong is a super overwhelming city. So the opportunity to get outside of that and enjoy nature was really exciting for me. We were also going to go up to Victoria's Peak, and then our other plan was to check out the Big Buddha, which
Yeah.
is one of Asia's biggest Buddhas.
And then the other thing we had heard really good things about was the food in Hong Kong. So eating and hiking were kind of our top two priorities.
Yeah, so much of our first day was spent with transportation, getting checked in, doing a little bit of work, and then we did make our way to the bay to watch the Symphony of Lights for the first night. So that happens every single night at 8 p.m. It's definitely something that's worth checking out, mostly because you get to see the Hong Kong skyline at night. And the Symphony of Lights is basically a laser show where lasers come off of different buildings and kind of, I guess, put on a
The
show.
word symphony is kind of a misnomer. It's like, I feel like it'd be more appropriately termed like the skyscraper light show thing.
Great marketing skills. That
Because
sounds
it's
like something
definitely
I
not-
want to go
Definitely
to.
not a symphony of light, but it is cool. You go down near like the ferry pier on the, what's that area called?
That's in TST.
Yeah. So down there, and you can see the whole skyline of Hong Kong, and the buildings are all lit up. So some of the cool stuff that's on there, there's a big Samsung building with a big, interesting dashboard, and the DJI drone company building has this cool light show where there's like drones and people walking on the side of the building from all the lights that are going on.
Yeah, and there's a ton of different stuff going on, and we are there, getting close to the Christmas season, so there was some Christmas type stuff happening. But I mean, even if the quote unquote Symphony of Lights doesn't really sound like your thing, I would definitely recommend going down to the bay, right around where you would take the Star Ferry to get across to the main island. Go down there and see the skyline lit up at night because it's amazing. All the buildings are lit up. It's really beautiful in terms of skylines.
Yeah, there's no reason to kill yourself to get down there for the light show at 8. But definitely get down there at night and check it out.
Yeah, so we will check in from a Starbucks, a really cool Starbucks that we found in Hong Kong, and give you an update on what our day 2 looked like. So we are currently at the reserve location of the Starbucks in Hong Kong, and what makes this location different is that it's got sort of a separate bar counter with reserve types of coffee from all over the world. You can get them in a siphon, and you can get a French press. So you've got, your standard Starbucks plus like big work tables and this additional coffee bar, which makes it really cool. So this is our second time visiting this Starbucks. We've had a really great day today. It's been pretty exhausting. We went up to the Peak. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Peak?
Sure. So Hong Kong, the city is kind of spans across an island and then a bit on the mainland, like the Kowloon side. On the island, which is kind of like main Hong Kong, it's actually quite mountainous. There's quite a lot of forested areas. It's not like Manhattan, for example, which is just all city. So the tallest peak on the island is called Victoria's Peak, and it's possible to take trams up to the top of it and get a cool lookout over the whole city. Instead of taking the tram like 98% of people, we decided to hike up. And yeah, it is a very steep walk, but you get up there, it takes about an hour, really nice view, good like activity to do. And then you can take the tram down. All of the transit in Hong Kong is covered by, you can just buy like, they call it an octopus card. You can use it, it's kind of like an Oyster card in London. And then you can use it for the tram, you can use it for the bus, you can use it for the metro. It's all really cheap. And so you can take the tram down, use your Oyster or octopus card. And then after that, we went to a restaurant called Home, which is like a really trendy kind of Western restaurant that's right in central Hong Kong.
We've just been eating as much as we can and seeing as much of the city. We're hopefully going to do another hike tomorrow. We're both feeling a bit overwhelmed with all of the people.
I'd say that's probably the biggest downside of being in Hong Kong is that there's people everywhere. You want to like have a moment just to like think and breathe. No, there's like a million people. But other than that, we're loving the city so far and excited to experience a bit more in the coming days. So we are currently on the tram in Hong Kong, which is different than the bus and the MRT, sort of this like old school double-decker. And it runs through, it's got like one line that kind of runs like through the center of Hong Kong. And it's kind of old school, which is the reason why we decided to do it. It kind of shakes around and makes like kind of bad noises when it stops. But it's been kind of a fun adventure because we can like poke our heads out and takes like videos and photos out of the front and back of it.
Yeah, and it's actually the second tram we've ridden because there is another tram that goes up and down to Victoria Peak, which we hiked up yesterday. And so we hiked up the hill, but then took the tram down, which was quite the experience.
Yeah, so the last time we checked in, we were talking about how we had hiked up Victoria Peak and how we were planning to do a hike today. And we actually woke up and both felt like way too tired to go hiking, so we turned off our alarms and went back to bed. And we spent much of today kind of just like seeking out food and doing a little bit of work.
The one thing about Hong Kong, though, we spent a lot of time on the island so far, and even off the island, it's just so busy that when you get kind of like tired of walking around just because you're dodging people all the time.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that's been really overwhelming for us since being here, is just like feeling like we want to just get from point A to point B, and there's like all these people that are sort of barriers to getting there. And it's definitely making the city a little bit overwhelming. Like, we're here for an entire week and it almost feels like that's a little bit too much in one go. We've been spending a lot of time on buses and public transit just because Hong Kong is actually quite big, despite like it looks really small, but it is quite big for the city. And I found myself this morning not actually wanting to get off the bus because that meant dealing with people. Like the bus and the tram that we're on right now is kind of like a safe place because it's a little bit like less overwhelming and busy. Would you agree?
Yeah, you just don't need to like exercise a ton of brain power to get around. It's not like a relaxing walk at all. But tonight we're meeting up with an acquaintance who hopefully becomes a friend. And tomorrow we are going up to hike Dragon's Back, which is a really popular hike here on the island. It's really famous, so apparently it's spectacular, and it'll be really nice to get outside of the city and get into nature. Hopefully we don't find any like giant spiders or snakes or anything like that.
Or giant rats. We've seen a couple of those so far, and it's a little bit gross. So we'll check in a little bit later.
So when most people, me included, picture Hong Kong, you kind of imagine this chaotic, big Asian city with a lot of Chinese influence, but also kind of a bit of Western influence. But what I didn't picture was all of the hiking, the bays, the kind of almost tropical vibe to it. And that's something we found out before going, is that there's a lot of hiking you can do in the new territories, which is off the island, but also just on the island. It's super compact and developed in one area, but then if you get over to the other side of the mountains or the other end of the island, you feel like you're on almost like a deserted island.
In like the Mediterranean or something.
Yeah. So one of the most popular hikes to do is one called Dragon's Back, which is on the island, accessible by public transit, a little bit of a hike. But we went out to Dragon's Back.
A hike? You mean like a... like
metaphorical hike.
And then a literal hike.
Yeah. Pun not intended.
Okay.
So after feeling a bit overwhelmed by the city, we were really excited to get out into nature and on our own. We thought about going out to the new territories, but those are a bit harder to access. So we went out to do Dragon's Back, took the train, took a bus, got out there, did the hike, and we check in with you guys from a spot called Big Wave Bay.
Yeah, which is the end of the hike.
All right, so we are sitting at a table by a concession stand drinking a coconut. Amanda's drinking a cider. And we're looking out at the ocean, some people surfing, and the beach at Big Wave Bay.
Yeah, and so the way that we got here was via a hike called Dragon's Back, which was one of the more popular hikes to do on the island of Hong Kong. And the way that you get here is from the mainland, you take a bus or the MTR over to the island, and then from there you take a combination of MTR as far basically east as you can go, and then a bus quite south, and then you start the hike. And the reason it's called Dragon's Back is that it kind of goes up and down in a hilly way, sort of like a dragon. And the hike said it was supposed to be about 4 hours, but I don't know, we've done it in under 3, so maybe we're just superheroes, I'm not too sure. But it's been really beautiful. It's kind of an overcast day with a little bit of blue sky, so it's not too hot. It's the perfect day for getting out and about, and it's been really amazing just like looking at the lush greenery and the rolling hills and seeing the sea and being like, wow, this is so different from this massive bustling city of Hong Kong in such a good way.
It's kind of funny because you almost get like Mediterranean vibes when you get around to the other side of the island. Maybe a little bit more lush, but it's rocky and like really blue ocean. Really cool hike. And then, yeah, you get out to this little bay where there's a lot of people surfing. As we walk down into this town here at Big Wave Bay, it kind of felt like Brazil a little bit. It's like a little surf town. And it's bizarre because if you had just like popped up here, like by teleport or something, you would never imagine that Hong Kong is like an hour away.
Definitely not. Like somebody, just transported you, or you had like a real life port key or something, and you're running from Voldemort, and you all of a sudden arrive here. You would have a really hard time, I think, figuring out where you are, especially because there's a lot of tourists over here. There's kind of people from all over the world. It definitely doesn't look like Hong Kong.
Yeah, so we are going to, you can come out, do the Dragon's Back hike. It's one of the most popular hikes in Hong Kong, and then take a bus back. So it's only maybe like half a day, 3/4 of a day adventure. Definitely worth doing when you're in Hong Kong, especially because, like we were saying before, it gets kind of overwhelming being in the city. There's so many people. So coming out here, especially if you can do it on a weekday, is relaxing, nice weather, calms down a bit. It's really like refreshing break from the city.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really great about Hong Kong is that the transportation system is just so effective. So just put it in my phone, like Dragon's Back trailhead, and there's a bus stop that literally drops you off right outside of the start of the trail. There's a toilet there, and it's just really efficient to get here. I think something that always makes me a little bit nervous is when you set out to hike in like a foreign country when you don't really know what's going on, especially in Asia. It might be like not well marked, or it might be hard to get to, and this has been like a pleasant adventure for sure.
One of the things that I was most looking forward to while being in Hong Kong was visiting the Big Buddha, which is located on Lantau Island, where Hong Kong Disneyland as well as the airport is. And because it's a little bit of a trek to get there from Hong Kong Island to Lantau, I knew that we needed a whole day. So Friday had been our Big Buddha day. It was our plan. We'd planned it basically the whole week. We were dedicating the entire day to exploring the Big Buddha. And we did do that, but we had plans with a friend on the Thursday night before, and we were meeting for a drink, and one drink turned into more than one drink.
Yes, and that kind of disrupted our morning plan.
Yeah, so we had planned to get up early so we didn't have to wait in a long line for the Big Buddha, because we'd been told that it does get quite busy, and we didn't end up getting home till a little bit late, so we did not get the early start that we had planned.
But we did have a good Hong Kong experience, I think. Since there's been such a big British influence on Hong Kong, there is still a pub culture and kind of like a after work drinks type culture there. So we met up with a friend and went to a pub, had a cider, and then he was telling us about this really cool place where
Had 2 ciders.
it's kind of it's almost like a underground bar or something. You go up to this door. There's no signs whatsoever. It's kind of glass door. You knock on the door. A woman kind of peers up from behind the curtain. She opens up the door. She's like, "Let me see an ID." You go in, there's no photos, no flash photos, no yelling. Lets you in the room, and you kind of walk in, and it's like you're in
like French Renaissance.
Yeah, like a living room that's themed, like French Renaissance theme. So there's like nice furniture and paintings and chandeliers and stuff. Bunch of people packed into a very small room. The whole bar is not much bigger than like a studio apartment. And what they specialize in is like daiquiris and like a few other fancy cocktails. So the strawberry daiquiri seems to be the most popular thing people get there, and it's made with real strawberries. They blend it up and they coat the outside of the glass in cocoa powder, so you drink it and it tastes like you're eating a chocolate-covered strawberry.
It's pretty magical. It's worth staying out late for.
Very cool bar, though. I don't even know. We don't know the name of it or
where it is or
the location, really.
It's somewhere in like the Soho area.
It's in Soho.
That's all I know.
If you do some Googling for like daiquiri bar, Soho, Hong Kong, you can probably find it. But really cool kind of like hidden place in Hong Kong. And it was a cool experience to go out and kind of experience a bit of the nightlife in Hong Kong.
Yeah, if you followed the podcast along since its birth a couple years ago, our trips used to be a lot more revolved around nightlife and I guess drinking culture, and we don't really do that anymore. We tend to focus more on different activities now, but it's occasionally fun to go out and experience what the nightlife is like in a place. And I think that Hong Kong has a particularly cool sort of after work drinking culture, like nice cocktail bar pub scene, because there's so many expats as well.
Yeah, and I think it's tough as a traveler because Hong Kong is expensive. Can't do that very often.
No.
But it was fun. Went out, got home late, sleep in, and at this point we're thinking, there's a gondola up to the Big Buddha. It shouldn't be much of an issue to get there later. Might just not have as much time. So we take the train all the way out to the stop where the gondola should normally leave from. And we get there, we walk over to the gondola and find out, closed for maintenance this week.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that is really tough as a traveler sometimes. We talked about in our episode about Malaysia how we went to the Batu Caves, and the warrior god, who's the big golden statue that's in front of the Batu Caves, was actually under sort of maintenance or construction. And, we're currently doing research for a trip in Myanmar, and I was just reading a really angry blog post about somebody who traveled all the way to the Golden Rock only to find it completely covered for maintenance. And those things are really crappy when you are going somewhere. Maybe it'll be the only time in your lifetime you'll get to go, and you have this one opportunity to go see something, and it's under construction or it's under maintenance, and you don't get to have the experience that you'd expected. And the gondola is expensive, but we had decided that we were going to do it one way, and that it would be sort of a treat for ourselves so that we could see more of Lantau Island and get the view of the Buddha from the sky. And so it was something we were pretty excited about. We weren't super disappointed. I think we were both like a little bit disappointed, but it's understanding that sometimes those things happen, and being upset about it isn't going to really help the situation, because it's not like we can make the gondola go. And it was closed for an entire week. So we weren't going to come back from Macau over to Hong Kong again just for the gondola. So we ended up just taking the bus.
Well, we ended up heading over to try to take the bus. And we do a check-in from the incredibly long line to take the bus because the gondola was closed.
So we are currently waiting in a very long bus line for the Big Buddha. And Friday has been our Big Buddha plan for a while, but we ended up going for a drink with a friend last night, or drinks for a friend, and stayed out a little bit too late. And so we didn't get up early enough, and now we've ended up in how long have we been waiting for?
Probably like an hour.
Yeah, so we've been waiting for the bus for ages. So the Big Buddha is actually on a different island than Hong Kong Island. So from the mainland, we took the MTR 2 different lines past like Disneyland Resort out to where the airport is. And we arrived here, everything was going smoothly. We're like, okay, awesome, we're willing to pay, for the cable car. We get here, cable car is not running, and they're not really running buses any faster than they normally would. And the taxi lineup's really long and kind of expensive, and only some of the taxis are actually allowed to go up to the Big Buddha, which is a little bit crazy. So we're almost to the front of this line. After about an hour waiting, it'll be about another hour before we get up to the Buddha. And
Yeah, things have been interesting so far, but we're super excited to see the Buddha.
So after waiting for the bus line for a while, we made it on. We rode up through a twisty, windy road, through some luscious hills, some good views of the ocean, up to a tiny village. And when you hop off the bus, we were kind of expecting the Big Buddha to be a little bit farther away, but hop off the bus, kind of start looking around at the village, and then like look over your shoulder, and you're like, wow, boom, it's like right up there. So to walk up from, it's called Nong.
I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. I feel like I butcher like almost everything that's in Cantonese.
So anyways, you get dropped off at a little touristy village, and then it's about maybe 200 steps up to the gigantic Buddha. And so we're sitting right now in its shadow, if there were a shadow, but it's a gray, overcast day. And it's actually kind of fitting because if you imagine, like, it's the type of weather you'd expect to see, like a temple inn on top of some mountains. There's like foggy clouds rolling around. The hills are all green. It feels very like kind of Asian temple-y.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm going to attempt the name of the village. I think it's Gongping, but there's an N on the front of the word gong, so it might be Ningongping. But I don't really know Cantonese, so I'm not entirely sure about that. And we're on the island of Lantau. So it's the island, like we mentioned before, with Disneyland and the airport and the Big Buddha. The Big Buddha is one of the biggest tourist attractions that people would come to this island for. I guess depending, I mean, if you're a Disney fanatic, then maybe that's your top attraction. But for us, it was definitely the Big Buddha.
So being over in Asia has really given us the opportunity to learn a little bit more about Buddhism, because neither Ryan or I really knew about Buddhism. I had this idea that there were a couple different, I guess, people who symbolized Buddha or Buddhism, and one of them was the fat sort of guy that you typically see, which is actually not Buddha. That's what in the West we call the laughing Buddha, which is actually not Buddha. Buddha is the slimmer man with the curlier hair, and that's who's depicted at the Big Buddha on Lantau Island. And you can see Buddha all over Asia in different seated positions, lying down. There's all different statues that are dedicated to Buddha. And this particular Big Buddha that we went to see is sitting in a cross-legged position with one hand out, sort of as if you were telling like a child to stop and not cross the street, and then the other hand in mudra, which is the thumb and the forefinger together. And this Buddha symbolizes protection as well as overcoming fear. And it's kind of a really beautiful symbol to walk up to the Buddha. You see a lot of people who are local or who practice the Buddhist religion praying to this Buddha, probably seeking insight from the Buddha. And it's neat to be traveling Asia and learning more about Buddhism. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's something that we've talked a lot on the show about, how travel is a really good opportunity to kind of put yourself in a context that makes you naturally interested in something. So at home, for a long time, I've been like, oh, I'd really like to learn more about Buddhism. But then when you're here, and a lot of the tourist attractions places are, or maybe not the tourist attractions, but the things to see in cities are like beautiful temples and all these other Buddhist sites, and you go there and you see all these people who are clearly very moved by being there, and you start to think like, what exactly does this mean to someone who is Buddhist? What does it mean? Why do people care? And so it's motivated us to learn more about it. So I bought a Intro to Buddhism book, and we've started doing some like learning online about it. And it's been fun. It's been a good way to like deepen our understanding of some of the stuff we're seeing. And especially as we go forward too, just staying in Southeast Asia for a while, it's going to continue to be something that comes up. So something we're both excited to learn more about, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that learning about what you're seeing is always interesting. I know in the past when we've traveled, we were a little bit younger, we would just go and see something and be like, oh yeah, this is really cool. I think as we get older, as we travel more, it's really important for us to kind of understand what we're seeing. So going,
Well, I don't know if it's important. It just makes your experience so much better.
yeah,
Like when you're just kind of going around doing stuff because it's on the list of things to do, you're very passive. It's not engaging. But if you take the time to learn more about it and put things into context, it kind of like ignites that curiosity that's already there. And so, like if you know more about the significance of Buddhism to this region, and you can go to these places and engage with it in so much of a different way than like, oh, it's pretty, it's gold. Like I think it just makes your experience so much better.
right. Yeah, definitely. I think that I 100% agree with that. And with this particular Buddha, you know, it's easy to kind of be like, oh, it's like the second biggest seated Buddha in the world. It's like, I'm going to go see it because it's this amazing thing to go see. And it is amazing. It is a big Buddha on a mountain. It's a trek to get there. Thinking about getting there, you know, before there was a really, really fast MRT is kind of crazy. But when you think about the symbolism to the country and how this Buddha sits on this island that may have been a gateway for people coming to visit Hong Kong, and it has its hand up facing out as a symbol of protection, is pretty beautiful.
Yeah, and so learning a little bit about it does add a lot to it in your experience of it.
Yeah, I feel like learning a little bit about the symbolism of the big Buddha is great, just to give a different perspective on why you're visiting it, and, you know, kind of getting a different experience while you're there.
Yeah, and we'll include some links in the show notes if you want to check more out about that.
Yeah, and of course photos. So once we felt like we had explored the Big Buddha as much as we wanted to, we made our way back down to the bus line. And once again, the bus line was a little bit long, not quite as long as getting up, but we were a little bit entertained by some giant cows that were sort of in the area causing a bit of mayhem. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah, there was, for some reason, in this whole like Big Buddha temple-y area, some large cattle just roaming around eating garbage. And then I don't know if it's typically a really long line or just happened to be the day we were there, especially because the gondola was closed, but the line to get the bus was really long. Not as long as on the way up, but a long time. Probably waited at least an hour. And there was just cows like milling about. If anyone opened up a bag and they heard a crinkle, they'd come over and try to like shove their nose up into it and get at whatever you were eating.
Yeah. So we had that experience while eating some snacks. It was kind of interesting that there was a lot of people who had clearly never encountered cows before, because they would go stand beside them and like put their hands on their heads to take photos, or stand by their butts. We're like, these cows have horns, like they could kick you. So it's kind of an interesting experience. I'm not really sure why they were there. I think though, so one thing with the Big Buddha is it took us about an hour from downtown to get there, like to the bus lineup. We waited in line for another hour, and then it was half an hour to 45 minutes before we actually got to the Big Buddha, and about the same on the way down. Do you think that it was worth it for you?
I don't know about worth it. There's just a lot of waiting around, which is fine because like I like listened to a podcast on the way down, and we got a bit lucky in our timing on the line on the way back. We went pretty quickly to the line, and then by the time we got on the bus, it was just gigantic. So if we had known that the gondola was closed and the line was going to be so bad, I don't think I would have chosen to go. It's a pretty amazing thing to see. I definitely do think, though, that getting up early to get there as soon as possible and avoiding the line would be a really good way to do it. And it's a shame, too, because only certain taxis are permitted to go up there, so it's actually quite hard to get a taxi.
It's expensive, too. Like, it's a lot more expensive than taking the bus. And it doesn't seem like it's that much faster.
Yeah, and I think there's some other ways you could do it with the bus, where maybe you don't take the bus that goes directly to Nongping, but you take a bus to some other spot, and then from there catch a different bus up. I think there would have been some ways to do it. But yeah, definitely be aware that if you are going at like 10, 11 a.m., you might have to wait a really long time to get up there. And if looking at a big monument isn't necessarily your thing, you might not want to put in that effort.
Right. Yeah. I think it was worth it for me. I mean, having phones with podcasts and music and stuff on it obviously makes the time pass a little bit easier. Bring a book, though.
Yeah, and I think it's the type of thing, we were there for a week, so it wasn't too bad to invest an entire day in that. But if you're only there for like 4 days, it's probably not one of your entire days invested in seeing the Big Buddha probably isn't something you want to do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely something just to consider if you are in Hong Kong. And so the Friday that we did see the Big Buddha was our final full day in Hong Kong. So the following day, we basically just had the morning and we made our way down to Causeway Bay, which is sort of another like hub downtown area for Hong Kong. We went there because you wanted to check out the DJI drone store. And we also visited a Lululemon store and then also went to the Times Square down there. Did you have any thoughts on Causeway Bay?
Well, we didn't really have much time, but I think it's like another developed commercial area. So I think there's a lot of good restaurants and cafes down there. There's malls and shops. I think it's an area worth checking out if you're there. We in particular went because I was curious to check out the DJI store and to look at the drones they have there. And it's kind of funny because they have this gigantic retail space, and then there's like 4 drones just like sitting on the shelves, but just so much empty space, which a friend of us was telling us is kind of like a statusy thing in Hong Kong, where you just have all this empty space to show that like, oh, you're a luxury brand or something. You can afford to pay all this money for just empty space.
Right, because space is so like hard to come by in Hong Kong. Like apartments are super, super tiny. People don't have that much space. So from Causeway Bay, we purchased our ferry tickets and we hopped back on the ferry to make our way back to Macau.
Well, we went to the Central Ferry Terminal.
Yeah. We didn't go from Causeway Bay. And so what were your highlights from Hong Kong?
So for me, there's not one thing that particularly stands out above the rest. Hiking up to the Victoria Peak was really cool. That was a fun day. Going hiking to the Dragon's Back was fun. And then probably just eating around and, having all these cool restaurants. Some reminders of home style restaurants. That was probably the top 3 things for me. Yeah. How about yourself?
I think probably the same thing. The fact that we were able to get outside of the city to check out Dragon's Back as well as the Big Buddha was a highlight for me, as I said not too long ago. And then I also like the hike up to Victoria's Peak. Hiking up it is pretty brutal. I was like dying a little bit because it's very hot, it's very humid, and it's straight up a mountain. I think it was worth it though. Like when we got to the top, there's so many people who had just taxied up or taken the tram up, and I felt really good about the fact that we walked our way up for that view. I also really enjoyed the food experience. I felt a little bit like guilty maybe that we didn't really have many like Asian food experiences because Chinese food experiences, because I've heard that the dim sum and a lot of the local food is really good. And I just didn't really feel like, I mean, I'm gluten-free, so it's a lot of that stuff is kind of hard for me to eat, but I don't know, there's so many good restaurants where we could get delicious, healthy, like Western food, and that's what I was really craving. So I feel like that was a nice experience, but I do feel kind of guilty for not trying some of the local food. Did you feel like that at all?
Not really. I feel like I can understand that story, but I'm not really too worried about it.
Yeah. And so what about some of the lowlights?
I think for me it was just how overwhelming it was in terms of the amount of people and the difficulty getting around. I really enjoyed being there. It's a little expensive and then a little bit difficult to get around. So I think going back, I'd really love to do more kind of nature stuff to get out the main area of the city and go up into like new territories or some of these other spots where you get away from the crowds would be something that I'd really love to do. And I think something that was really good for us was mixing it up. Like we had a day at the Big Buddha. Before that, we were in the city. The day before it, we went hiking. So if you're planning on being there for like 5 days and you're just gonna stick to city stuff, I feel like by the end of it, you're gonna be tired.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just very like mentally and physically exhausting to be on the streets of Hong Kong trying to navigate around. There's like a lot of sensory stimulation happening. It's like it's loud, it's bright, there's like people everywhere, and it's amazing in that way. But then it just wears on you after a couple days. So I think I would echo what you were saying. When we were searching for places to stay, we'd come across this beautiful looking Airbnb that was sort of on the east part of the mainland and right near another really popular hike that's a little bit further than Dragon's Back. And I was like, oh yeah, that would be good for a couple of days. And I think that would have been the next step. Like if we had 10 days or 2 weeks in Hong Kong, then making our way out a little bit further.
Yeah, and I think something that's interesting for us, because we had been in Macau and Singapore before this, I feel like we enjoyed Hong Kong more than some of the other people we talked to who have just been kind of coming from a backpacking Southeast Asia perspective, because there wasn't like this huge price shock where people are like, oh God, it's so expensive, I can't handle it.
Yeah. I mean, I just kind of like didn't do the conversion that often, to be honest, because I'm just like, I really want to just enjoy this. But yeah, I mean, it would have been great to stay in a little bit nicer place, to stay on the island so that we were closer. And, you know, that would have been $100 to $200 a night for hotel. And unfortunately, we just don't have the budget to do that for a week. So maybe next time we go, we'll have a little bit more funding to do it.
But it's not necessary. Like there are what are considered budget accommodations for Hong Kong. They're just not nice at all. And you're paying like $50.
I mean, the hostel we stayed at was pretty nice. It was just like expensive and far for what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that was probably a low light as well, just how much time we spent on public transit. The hostel we were staying at for the middle part of our week was off near Kowloon Bay. So quite a while out of the city, and then taking the bus in was like a half an hour adventure. So spending so much time on public transport was kind of a bummer, but it is really nice. The system they've got set up with the octopus cards makes it really easy. It's quite affordable as a traveler to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So the last thing we wanted to touch on before was, for us, we were coming from Macau, spent time in Hong Kong, and then went back to Macau. Most people, I feel like Macau is not really on the itinerary for most people. But do you think it's worth taking a trip over there if you are going to be in Hong Kong?
Yeah, 100%. I really, really enjoyed our time in Macau. I think that there's definitely enough to do for a couple days. But if you only have a day, you could definitely see some good sights, try some good food. It's our friend who stayed with Tanis is saying how it's like the most compact area per like square meter or something. Like it's the most densely populated area, but it doesn't feel like that. Like it feels way less busy than Hong Kong, especially if you can get to like Taipa or Koh Luan, two of the other areas outside of like the Macau area. The Macau area is the busiest, and yeah, I would definitely recommend it. Yeah,
so Macau it used to be a Portuguese colony, so there's Portuguese architecture, and yeah, an interesting culture there in Macau. And it is kind of cool to go see all these gigantic casinos that are set up.
Yeah, I think the thing that struck me the most about Macau, and, you know, we'll talk more about Macau on a Macau-specific episode, but the thing that I liked the most was the difference between old and new. There's, you know, Taipa Village on Taipa Island is very old, where the Portuguese would have been, and, you know, Senado Square is another historical area, and so you see this Portuguese influence, and then it's all very Chinese, but posh Chinese. So it's very wealthy. There's a lot of money, and you can be standing in Taipa Village and you look down this very, very old cobblestone street and, you know, the Venetians at the end of it. And just the difference between old and new is really cool in Macau.
Yeah. So definitely worth going to check out if you are in Hong Kong for a little bit, and the ferries are really affordable. Well, I mean, they're not cheap, but they're not super expensive, and it's a quick little jaunt over.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so that concludes our episode on Hong Kong. If anyone has any questions or comments about Hong Kong, you can send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. We always love to hear from you. If you have any other recommendations, definitely reach out to us.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers 1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.